Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going on a deep dive that might just kind of flip your thinking on its head a little.
Yeah.
We're going to be exploring this idea of losing the destination in order to find peace.
Interesting.
It's a lot deeper than it sounds, trust me.
Well, I'm intrigued already.
All right, well, to help guide us, we've got some excerpts from Pasted Text and Prajnaparamita and the Path to Enlightenment.
And you know what's really fascinating about this idea of losing the destination to find peace?
What's that?
It's actually like a core principle in Buddhist teachings on achieving enlightenment.
It does seem kind of counterintuitive at first, though, right?
Yeah.
If you want to achieve something, like, how can we possibly do that without a clear destination in mind?
Right.
It's almost like we need that goal in order to get there. One of our sources, Pasted Text, actually mentions this quote from Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva talking about entering the flow and losing your destination. Where even the ideas of like movement and stillness, they just disappear completely. What does that even mean, like practically speaking?
That is the question, isn't it? It really gets to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
Okay, so imagine you're on a boat. You're rowing really hard towards a specific point on the shore.
Okay.
Your mind is completely fixated on reaching that destination.
Got it.
And like every little ripple, every current that pushes you off course, it just creates all this like anxiety and frustration.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
Now, imagine just letting go of the oars, allowing the river to carry you.
Just go with the flow.
Exactly. That's the flow we're talking about.
Okay.
It's not about being passive or giving up or anything like that. It's more about shifting that focus from the end point to the journey itself.
I see.
And like finding that peace in the present moment, regardless of where you actually end up.
So it's less about constantly chasing after something and more about just being present in each moment as it comes?
Exactly.
Is that what this idea of like stillness is all about?
Yeah, it's about recognizing that true peace isn't something we achieve out there in the future.
Right.
It's more of a state of being that we can cultivate right here and now.
In this moment.
Right now. And this connects really beautifully with the Buddhist concept of achieving enlightenment through what they call listening, thinking, and practicing.
Interesting.
One of our sources describes these actions as emptiness, formlessness, and inaction. That's
It can sound a little intimidating, eh?
Right, it does sound a little bit like we're just supposed to sit around and do nothing.
Right.
But how does that lead to enlightenment?
Well, it's not so much about physical inaction.
Okay.
It's more about a kind of mental stillness.
I see.
So emptiness refers to emptying our minds of those like preconceived notions,
Right.
biases, and attachments that tend to cloud our perception of things.
Okay.
Then you have formlessness, which is about like releasing that need to control everything.
Right.
To like force things into a specific shape.
And then finally, inaction is really about letting go of ego-driven striving, allowing ourselves to be guided by a deeper wisdom.
So it's kind of like we're clearing out all the mental clutter so we can actually see things clearly.
Precisely.
Like wiping a dusty window, suddenly the world outside just becomes vivid and vibrant.
Exactly.
So how does this all tie in with the story of Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva achieving enlightenment? You mentioned that a bit earlier.
Yes. The Lingyan Sutra actually tells the story of Avalokitesvara achieving enlightenment by following the teachings of a Buddha.
Got it.
It really emphasizes the importance of hearing, thinking, and practicing to reach this state of,
Samadhi.
Yeah, it's a state of like profound meditative absorption where the mind becomes still and clear.
Okay.
It's often described as a state of pure awareness,
Interesting.
free from all those distractions of thoughts and emotions.
Wow, that sounds amazing. But how do we even begin to achieve something like that? It seems almost like superhuman.
It might seem that way, but remember, Avalokitesvara was once just an ordinary being like us.
Right.
And the Lingyan Sutra actually gives us a clue.
Okay, what's that?
It emphasizes the importance of hearing, which in this context means being open to like new ideas and teachings. Then thinking involves reflecting deeply on those teachings, questioning our own assumptions, and developing a deeper understanding.
I see.
And then practicing means integrating these insights into our daily lives through like mindful action and meditation.
So it's not just about sitting on a mountaintop meditating all day?
Not at all.
Okay, good.
It's about cultivating a mindset of awareness and intentionality in every aspect of our lives.
So like in our everyday lives?
Yeah, it's about paying attention to our thoughts, our actions, and even just our interactions with the world around us.
So for someone listening who's thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but how do I actually apply this losing the destination concept to my own life? What advice would you give them?
Well, I think a great starting point is to just become more aware of like where we're holding on to destinations in our lives.
Okay.
Are we clinging to a specific outcome at work, in a relationship, or even in our personal development? What would it look like to let go of that rigid attachment and instead focus on being fully present in the process?
That's a good point. It's so easy to get caught up in all those what ifs and should be's.
Right.
And we forget to appreciate the journey itself.
Exactly. And that's where the true peace and fulfillment lie.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the concept of losing the destination, but one of the sources, the Prajnaparamita and the Path to Enlightenment, kind of introduces a whole other layer to this.
Ooh.
It talks about the 6 paramitas, or perfections: generosity, morality, patience, diligence, meditation, and wisdom.
Ah, yes. The 6 paramitas.
What role do these play in this idea of letting go?
These are like essential practices on the path to enlightenment.
Okay.
And what's fascinating is how each of them actually embodies this concept of losing the destination in its own unique way.
So it's not just about letting go of external goals.
Right.
It's also about transforming our inner world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where the 6 paramitas really come in.
Okay, I'm definitely curious to hear more about this.
Yeah.
Let's dive into the 6 paramitas. First up, generosity.
Yeah.
What does generosity look like when we're practicing this idea of losing the destination?
Well, think about it this way. Usually when we think about generosity, we think about giving something to someone else.
Right, like money or time.
Yeah, whatever it might be.
Got it.
But true generosity, as it's described in the Prajnaparamita, goes beyond the actual act of giving itself.
You mean it's not just about what we give, but how we give it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about giving without any attachment to the outcome, without expecting anything in return, and without even clinging to the idea of ourselves as like the giver.
So it's about detaching from the ego,
Yeah.
from that need for recognition or reward that often motivates our actions.
Right.
That's a tough one.
It is challenging, but it's also incredibly liberating.
Yeah, I can see that.
When we give from a place of like genuine selflessness,
Yeah.
we tap into a much deeper well of joy and fulfillment. The act of giving itself becomes the reward.
It makes sense. It's like shifting from a transactional mindset
Yeah,
to a more heartfelt way of being.
precisely. And this shift in perspective applies to all 6 paramitas.
Interesting.
It's about transforming our relationship to our actions,
Right.
our thoughts,
Okay.
and even ourselves.
Okay, so we've talked about generosity, but what about the other 5 paramitas? How do morality, patience, diligence, meditation, and wisdom all fit into this idea of losing the destination?
Well, let's take morality, for example.
Okay.
You know, usually we think of morality as like following a set of rules, right?
Right.
But in the context of Prajnaparamita, morality becomes less about those external rules and more about cultivating inner virtue.
Okay.
It's about acting from a place of compassion and understanding, recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings.
So it's less about don't do this,
Right.
and more about asking, what is the most compassionate and skillful way to act in this situation?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about aligning our actions with our deepest values,
Yeah.
even when it's difficult or inconvenient.
And what about patience? That one always feels like a challenge for me.
Patience is a powerful practice, and it's often misunderstood. It's
Yeah.
not about gritting our teeth and just enduring hardship,
Right.
but rather about cultivating a deep inner peace that allows us to navigate challenges with grace and what we call equanimity.
So it's not about resisting or getting frustrated when things don't go our way.
Yeah.
Patience is more about accepting what is and finding that peace within ourselves.
Exactly. The Prajnaparamita reminds us that, difficulties are an inevitable part of life,
For sure.
and it's our reaction to those difficulties that really determines our suffering.
That makes sense.
It's about recognizing that even in the midst of challenges, there is always an opportunity for growth and learning.
That's a really helpful way to think about patience.
Good.
Okay, so we've covered generosity, morality, and patience. What about diligence? How does that tie into this idea of losing the destination?
Diligence in the context of the Prajnaparamita is not about striving for personal gain or recognition, but rather about dedicating ourselves wholeheartedly to the path of awakening.
Interesting.
It's about putting in the effort,
Okay.
not for the sake of achieving some external goal,
I see.
but because we recognize the inherent value of the journey itself.
So it's not about pushing ourselves to the point of burnout or anything like that.
No, not at all.
It's more about finding joy and purpose in the actual process of learning and growing.
Exactly. It's about approaching our endeavors with a sense of enthusiasm and dedication, even when things get tough.
That makes sense. Okay, 2 more to go. Meditation. This one seems pretty straightforward, right? Just sit and meditate and you'll achieve enlightenment.
Well, meditation is a powerful tool for cultivating stillness and insight.
Okay.
But it's not as simple as just sitting there.
Right.
The Prajnaparamita emphasizes that meditation is about training the mind to become more aware and less reactive. It's about observing our thoughts and emotions without judgment.
I see.
Allowing ourselves to settle into a state of inner peace.
So it's not about emptying the mind of thoughts completely.
No.
It's more about learning to relate to our thoughts in a different way.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about cultivating a sense of spaciousness within ourselves, a place of calm and clarity amidst the constant chatter of the mind.
That's a really helpful way to think about meditation. Okay, last but not least, wisdom. How does wisdom fit into this idea of losing the destination?
Wisdom, in the context of the Prajnaparamita, is not just about accumulating knowledge, but rather about developing a deep understanding of the nature of reality. It's about seeing the world clearly, free from the distortions of our, ego-driven perceptions.
So it's about seeing things as they truly are.
Yes.
Not how we want them to be.
Right.
Or how our fears and desires make them appear.
Precisely. It's about cultivating a discerning mind that's able to, penetrate through illusions and perceive the interconnectedness of all things.
This is all so incredibly insightful. It seems like these 6 paramitas are not just individual practices, but rather interconnected facets of a way of being in the world.
You've hit the nail on the head. They all work together synergistically to guide us towards enlightenment.
And ultimately, this path of enlightenment, of cultivating the 6 paramitas, is all about letting go of our attachment to destinations and embracing the journey itself.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that true peace and fulfillment come not from achieving some external goal.
Right.
But rather from cultivating a state of inner stillness and wisdom.
This has been a really fascinating exploration of this concept of losing the destination. I'm already feeling inspired to start incorporating some of these teachings into my own life.
Oh, that's great.
But before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I'm curious to hear more about how this all connects back to the story of Avalokitesvara.
Okay.
You mentioned that they achieved enlightenment by following the teachings of a Buddha.
Yes.
What exactly were those teachings, and how did they embody this idea of losing the destination?
That's a great question, and it's one that takes us even deeper into the heart of Buddhist teachings.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's hear it.
So, to understand the teachings that led Avalokitesvara to enlightenment, we need to kind of delve into this concept of emptiness, or shunyata in Sanskrit.
Okay, emptiness. We talked about that a little bit earlier, with the whole emptiness, formlessness, and inaction thing.
Right.
I'm still a little fuzzy on what it actually means, though.
Yeah.
Does it mean that, nothing really exists?
That's actually a pretty common misconception.
Oh, okay.
Emptiness doesn't mean that things don't exist.
Okay.
But rather that things don't exist in that, fixed, independent way that we usually perceive them.
So it's more about how we perceive things than about the things themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Think about, a table, for instance.
Yeah.
We see it as this solid, separate object.
Yeah.
But if we, break it down to its smallest components, it's really just a collection of atoms constantly in motion, interacting with the environment.
Okay, I see what you mean. It's like our perception is creating the illusion of solidity and separateness.
Precisely. And this illusion of separateness extends to ourselves as well.
Oh, how so?
Well, we tend to cling to this idea of a fixed, independent self. But in reality, we're constantly changing, interacting with the world around us.
Yeah, that's true.
More like a flow of experiences rather than a static entity,
So this idea of emptiness is really about recognizing the interconnectedness of all things.
Yes. It's about seeing through that illusion of separateness.
Okay.
And realizing that we're all part of this vast, interconnected web of existence.
Wow, that's a pretty mind-blowing concept.
Yeah, it is.
How does this connect back to the story of Avalokitesvara, though, and the teachings that led to their enlightenment?
Well, the teachings that Avalokitesvara received, they emphasize this very understanding of emptiness, of interconnectedness. They realize that all phenomena, everything, is impermanent, interconnected, and ultimately empty of inherent self.
And this realization led to their enlightenment.
Yes. By letting go of that attachment to a fixed, independent self.
Okay.
Avalokitesvara was able to fully embrace the interconnectedness of all things, to kind of merge with the flow of existence.
So it's like by letting go of this illusion of our separate selves, we actually open ourselves up to a much wider reality.
Exactly. And this wider reality, that's what we call enlightenment.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm still wondering, though, what did this realization actually look like for Avalokitesvara? How did they actually practice this idea of losing the destination?
The Lingyan Sutra tells us that Avalokitesvara cultivated this understanding of emptiness through deep meditation, the practice of compassion.
So it wasn't just about intellectual understanding,
Right.
but about actually living these principles in their daily life.
Exactly. And that's a key point for us as well.
Right.
It's not enough to just understand these concepts intellectually.
Right. Yeah.
We need to embody them, live them, integrate them into our actions and our interactions with the world around us.
So for someone listening who's thinking, okay, I get it, emptiness, interconnectedness, all that jazz, but how do I actually practice this in my own life? What advice would you give them?
Well, I think a good starting point is to just become more aware of the ways in which we cling to a sense of separateness in our daily lives.
I mean, like getting upset when someone cuts us off in traffic?
Yeah.
Or feeling jealous when someone else succeeds?
Exactly. Those are all examples of how we create that sense of separation between ourselves and others. We start to see ourselves as these separate individuals competing for these limited resources.
And that creates suffering.
Exactly. When we see ourselves as separate from others,
Yeah.
we create this sense of fear, insecurity, and competition.
Right.
But when we recognize our interconnectedness, that's when we can tap into a wellspring of compassion, kindness, and generosity.
So how do we actually shift from that mindset of separation to a mindset of interconnectedness? Is it just a matter of telling ourselves that we're all connected?
It's a good start, but it takes more than just intellectual understanding.
Okay,
We need to cultivate this understanding on an experiential level.
I see.
And that's where practices like meditation and mindfulness really come in.
So by paying attention to our thoughts, our emotions, and our bodily sensations, we can start to see how interconnected everything really is.
Exactly. When we pay close attention, we begin to notice how our internal world is constantly interacting with the external world. We see how our thoughts and emotions are influenced by the people we interact with, the places we go, the things we experience.
And that helps us to let go of that illusion of a separate self.
Precisely. By recognizing the impermanence and interconnectedness of all things, we start to loosen the grip of our ego.
Oh.
And that's when we can truly begin to lose the destination.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, we've talked a lot about emptiness and interconnectedness.
Right.
But I'm wondering how this all relates back to the 6 paramitas. Earlier, we were talking about how each of the 6 paramitas embodies this idea of losing the destination in a unique way.
Right.
Can you give us some specific examples of how this plays out in the context of the Prajnaparamita text?
Absolutely. Let's take generosity, for example.
Okay.
The Prajnaparamita tells us that true generosity is not just about giving material possessions,
Okay.
but also about giving our time, our energy, our compassion, even our forgiveness.
So it's about giving freely without any expectation of reward or recognition.
Exactly. And the text actually goes even further.
Oh.
It says that we shouldn't even cling to the idea of ourselves as the giver.
What do you mean?
It says the Bodhisattva does not think, I am giving alms. Do not think, I give to this person and use this thing to give.
Wow, that's a pretty radical idea.
It is.
It's like we're being asked to completely detach from the act of giving itself.
Yes. And that's the key to true generosity.
Oh.
When we let go of that ego's need for recognition, the act of giving becomes like a pure expression of our interconnectedness with all beings.
Oh, I see.
It's no longer about I am giving to you,
Right.
but rather about recognizing that we're all part of this unified flow of energy and intention.
That's a beautiful way to think about generosity.
Yeah.
It makes it feel less like a duty and more like a joyful expression of our interconnectedness.
Exactly. And this same principle applies to all 6 paramitas.
Okay.
It's about letting go of our attachment to a separate self and embracing the reality of our interconnectedness with all things.
Okay, so we've talked about generosity, but what about the other 5 paramitas? Can you give us some more examples of how they embody this idea of losing the destination?
Absolutely. Let's take morality, or sila in Sanskrit.
Okay.
The Prajnaparamita emphasizes that true morality isn't about rigidly following rules, but rather about cultivating inner virtue and acting from a place of compassion and understanding.
So it's not about being a goody two-shoes,
Right.
but about making choices that actually align with our deepest values and benefit all beings.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just avoiding harmful actions.
Okay.
True morality involves actively cultivating positive qualities like kindness, compassion, honesty, and integrity.
So it's about embodying those qualities in every aspect of our lives.
Yeah.
Not just when it's convenient or easy.
Precisely. It's about living our lives in a way that reflects our understanding of interconnectedness.
That's a high bar. But it also seems incredibly liberating.
It is.
It's like we're no longer bound by external rules, but rather guided by this inner compass of compassion and wisdom.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of the path of enlightenment.
Yeah.
It's not about following someone else's rules, but about discovering our own innate wisdom and living in alignment with that.
Okay, I'm really starting to see how this all fits together.
Good.
We got emptiness, which is about recognizing the interconnectedness of all things. And then we have the 6 paramitas, which are practices that help us actually embody that understanding in our daily lives.
Exactly.
But I'm still kind of curious about how this all connects back to that idea of losing the destination. Can you help me tie those threads together?
Of course. You see, when we cling to destinations, to those fixed outcomes,
Yeah.
we're essentially just reinforcing that illusion of separate self.
Okay.
We're saying like, I need to achieve this, I need to get that in order to be happy or fulfilled.
Right.
But when we practice the paramitas, when we cultivate this understanding of emptiness, we start to let go of that ego-driven striving.
Okay.
We begin to see that true happiness and fulfillment come not from achieving these external goals,
I see.
but from realizing our interconnectedness with all things.
So it's like by letting go of our attachment to destinations,
Right.
we're actually opening ourselves up to a much wider, more fulfilling experience of life.
Exactly. It's like we're letting go the oars and allowing ourselves to be carried by the current of life, trusting that we will be guided to where we need to be.
That's a beautiful image. Okay, this is all incredibly insightful, but I have to admit, it also raises some questions for me.
Okay, like what?
If enlightenment is all about losing the destination, can we truly strive for it? Or is the very act of striving counterproductive?
That's a brilliant question, and it's one that has puzzled Buddhist practitioners for centuries.
Okay, so what's the answer?
There's no easy answer. It's a paradox that lies at the heart of Buddhist teachings.
Oh, okay.
On the one hand, we're encouraged to cultivate a sense of aspiration, to dedicate ourselves to the path of awakening.
Right.
But on the other hand, we're constantly reminded that clinging to any destination, even enlightenment, can create suffering.
So how do we reconcile those two seemingly contradictory ideas?
I think the key lies in understanding the nature of aspiration itself.
Okay.
In the context of Buddha's teachings, aspiration is not about this ego-driven striving, but rather about aligning our intentions with the well-being of all beings.
Okay.
It's about cultivating this deep desire to alleviate suffering and awaken to our true nature. Not for our own personal gain, but for the benefit of all.
So it's like we're shifting our motivation from me to we.
Exactly. And when our aspiration is rooted in this kind of selfless motivation, it no longer becomes an obstacle to enlightenment. In fact, it becomes this powerful force that actually propels us towards liberation.
That's a really helpful way to think about it.
Right.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive.
We have.
We've explored the concept of emptiness, the 6 paramitas, and the paradox of striving for enlightenment.
Yes, we've been on quite a journey.
And there's still more to explore. In the next and final part of our deep dive, I want to take a closer look at this idea of no distinction that you mentioned earlier.
Excellent. That's a key concept in the Prajnaparamita teachings. And it takes us even deeper into this idea of losing the destination.
Okay, I'm ready to dive in. Let's do it. Okay, so we're back and ready to unpack this idea of no distinction in the context of losing the destination. To be honest, it sounds pretty cryptic.
I know, it is a bit of a head-scratcher at first glance.
Right.
But it's incredibly profound once you actually grasp it.
Okay.
Remember how we've been talking about this whole illusion of separateness?
Yeah.
You know how we tend to see ourselves as like distinct from others and the world around us?
Yeah, for sure. That's been a recurring theme throughout this whole deep dive.
Exactly. Well, this concept of no distinction takes that idea a step further.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that even the distinctions that we make between like the giver, the receiver, and even the act of giving itself, they're ultimately illusory. It's all part of this unified flow of energy and intention.
Okay, so you're saying that even the act of giving, which we usually think of as something we do for someone else, is actually part of this whole interconnected web.
Precisely. The Prajnaparamita text actually puts it this way. There is no such distinction in the Dana-paramita. Being far away from this shore and the other shore is the characteristic of the Dana-paramita.
This shore and the other shore, that sounds familiar. It's like that image of the river merging with the ocean that we talked about earlier, right?
Yeah.
Losing its individual identity in the vastness.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that ultimately there are no fixed boundaries, no separate entities. Everything is in this constant state of flow, of interconnectedness.
So how do we actually cultivate the sense of no distinction in our own lives, though? I mean, it's one thing to just understand it intellectually, but how do we actually experience it?
Well, I think it starts with awareness.
Yeah.
Becoming mindful of the ways in which we create separation in our thoughts, our words, our actions.
Right.
Notice when you catch yourself thinking things like, I'm doing this for you, or this is mine, that is yours.
So it's about becoming aware of the language we use, the stories we tell ourselves.
Absolutely. The language we use really shapes our perception of the world. When we constantly reinforce that idea of separation, it becomes our reality.
Right.
But when we start to actually use language that reflects that interconnectedness, that's when we can begin to shift our experience.
So instead of saying, I'm giving you this,
Yeah,
we might say something like, let's share this.
exactly. It's like a subtle shift in language, but it can make a big difference.
Yeah, I see that.
It's about moving from that transactional mindset to a more relational one.
And this idea of no distinction doesn't just apply to generosity, right? The Prajnaparamita text talks about how it extends to all 6 paramitas.
You're absolutely right. It's like a foundational principle that permeates all aspects of the path to enlightenment.
Okay.
For example, with morality.
Yeah.
It's not just about following rules to avoid negative consequences for ourselves, but rather about understanding that our actions actually ripple outwards, impacting the entire web of life.
So it's about taking responsibility for the well-being of the whole, not just our individual selves.
Precisely. And with patience, it's not just about enduring difficult situations with those gritted teeth,
Right.
but about recognizing that those challenges are just an inevitable part of life.
Yeah.
And that even in the midst of suffering, there's this opportunity for growth and transformation.
That's a powerful thought.
It is.
And this idea of no distinction applies to diligence, meditation, and wisdom as well.
Absolutely. With diligence, it's about dedicating ourselves to the path of awakening, not for personal gain, but for the benefit of all beings.
Okay.
With meditation, it's about recognizing that our true nature is not separate from the universe, but rather an integral part of it. And with wisdom, it's about seeing the world clearly, free from the distortions of our ego-driven perceptions, recognizing the interconnectedness of all things.
Wow, this is all so interconnected. It's like every piece of this puzzle just fits perfectly together.
It's a beautiful tapestry, isn't it?
It really is.
And it's a tapestry that we're all weaving together through our thoughts, our words, and our actions.
So for someone listening who's feeling inspired by all this, what's a good first step they can take to start cultivating the sense of no distinction in their own lives?
I think the most important thing is to simply start paying attention,
Okay.
Notice the ways in which you create separation in your daily life. Become aware of the language you use,
Right.
the stories you tell yourself, the choices you make,
Got it.
and then gently start to shift your perspective.
Okay.
Look for opportunities to connect, to share, to cultivate a sense of unity rather than separateness.
It's like we're being invited to step out of our own little individual bubbles and into this much wider, more expansive reality.
Exactly. And that's where the true magic happens. When we let go of that illusion of separateness, we open ourselves up to a world of infinite possibility, a world of interconnectedness, compassion, and just boundless joy.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. We started with this idea of losing the destination and ended up exploring the nature of reality itself.
It's amazing how these concepts all weave together, isn't it?
It really is. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of what it means to actually live a truly meaningful and fulfilling life. And I hope our listeners feel the same way.
I hope so too. Remember, the path to enlightenment is not about achieving some distant goal, but rather about embracing the present moment and realizing our interconnectedness with all things. It's a journey that's available to each and every one of us, right here, right now.
Beautifully said. And with that, We'll leave our listeners to ponder this profound journey of losing the destination. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.